So let's face it, one of these two men, Barack Obama or Mitt Romney, will be president. But here's the thing. When it comes to who really stands to gain the most tonight, Barack Obama and Mitt Romney aren't anywhere in the equation. Instead, their investors will be the real winners and losers tonight.
And that's all thanks to the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision. This is the first presidential election in which millionaires, billionaires, transnational corporations, trade groups, unions, you name it, can spend unlimited amounts of money to put their guy in the White House.
And there are a lot of people standing just behind those two men who've really taken advantage in this no-holds-barred electoral contest. So let's meet a few of them.
All right, first up, Sheldon Adelson. He's worth more than $20 billion, and he ranks 12th on Forbes' 400 Richest Americans list. He's a casino mogul who made a lot of his fortune building casinos in Macau, China. And he's given more than $70 million to help Mitt Romney win this election. That's more money than any single person has ever spent in an election in our nation's history. In fact, it's 3 times more. So what does Adelson stand to gain from a Mitt Romney presidency?
Oh, I don't know, about $2.3 billion. That's how much Adelson will save under Mitt Romney's tax plan, which gives people like Adelson and Mitt Romney himself massive tax breaks on income, dividends, capital gains, and estates. See, under a Romney administration, Adelson's heirs also stand to gain an additional $9 billion once the guy croaks. Oh, and President Obama's Justice Department is investigating Adelson for corruption and bribing foreign officials to get his casinos built in Macau. So for Adelson, an investment in Mitt Romney and a new Justice Department could put an end to this investigation. This guy's Sheldon Adelson. He's the man behind the curtain. He's the top oligarch this election. But sadly, he's not alone.
That's right. There's also Harold Simmons, worth over $9 billion and ranked 33rd on the Forbes Richest Americans list. Simmons invented the leveraged buyout and now controls 5 publicly traded companies dealing mostly in metals and chemicals. He's given $20 million so far to Mitt Romney and other Republican super PACs. He claims he's spending all of this money in order to, quote, stop that socialist Barack Obama.
Well, that's good. I'm glad someone's doing that. And let's not forget about Karl Rove and the Koch brothers. You see, these guys and other wealthy businessmen have promised to spend as much as $500 million and have to defeat President Obama this election cycle. For the Kochs, Mitt Romney's tax cuts, deregulation, and privatization agenda translate into massive windfall profits for the energy barons. And for Karl Rove, well, he's corporate America's top political henchman, and he likes to win. So these are the guys invested in Mitt Romney.
And let's not forget the other side. Democrats have their fair share of deep-pocketed donors as well. Meet James Simmons. He's a billionaire hedge fund manager worth over $10 billion and ranked 30th on Forbes' list. He's given $4 million to super PACs supporting President Obama and the Democrats.
And then there's Steve Mostin, a Texas trial lawyer who's given more than $3 million to pro-Obama and pro-Democratic super PACs.
And let's not forget about Fred Eichner. He's a media mogul based out of Chicago, which is President Obama's home city. And he's given more than $3 million as well as help to President Obama and other Democrats to help them win tonight. But here's the big picture of all of this. More money will be spent on this election than any election in our history.
Yeah, this is a freak show election with freak show amounts of money pouring into it. So the question is, what effect will all this money have on our democracy? For more on that, let's talk to journalist and contributor to The Nation, Lee Fong, and activist and spokesperson for Move to Amend, David Cobb. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Leah, I want to start with you. What did Citizens, for the person who hasn't been following and is just now tuning in on election night, what did Citizens United really do?
Well, the Citizens United Supreme Court decision was handed down in January of 2010. This decision basically overturned 100 years of campaign finance law, going back to 1907 with the Tillman Act, which prohibited corporations from spending directly to support candidates. So by overriding that law, McCain-Feingold, decades of precedent, the Supreme Court basically gave the green light for corporations and unions to spend directly in the election. And while many have focused on how corporations can now give unlimited sums to super PACs and other campaign committees, the law is actually much more pervasive. For instance, we've seen a growing trend where now corporations can communicate with their employees and their vendors in a new way. Basically, if a corporation says to one of its workers, I want you to vote for Mitt Romney because they're good for our business, and if you don't, it's likely you'll lose your job. Well, the corporation doesn't know exactly how that voter voted in the voting booth, but this type of intimidation is now legal, and we're seeing it in many different instances all over the country. So corporations can now spend unlimited amounts in campaign committees. They can directly advertise for candidates, hosting them on site, and they can also do this new form of communication with their employees.
And David, let me go ahead and turn the conversation to you for just a minute. I do want to ask you if these campaign contributions in a post-Citizens United world is really just an investment at this point.
Well, of course it is. I appreciate how you and Sam have been talking about it. I mean, most charitably, it's an investment. I prefer to call it what I believe it really is, which is legalized bribery. We have really legitimized the ability not just for candidates to be able to support candidates they like, but even more perversely to intimidate either sitting officials or people who are running for office, to intimidate them not to do what is in the people's best interest. So absolutely, this corporate money has completely corrupted the political process. I don't know a single person, Democrat, Republican, Green, Libertarian, or Independent, who thinks that this is a good idea.
Lee, this is going to be the first presidential election post-Citizens United. We've seen two other elections. We saw the Wisconsin recall, where we saw lots of outside money being spent, and we saw the 2010 midterm, where we saw lots of outside money being spent, and conservatives won both those elections fairly big. And after the 2010 midterm in particular, we saw Congress's approval rating drop to 10%, lowest ever recorded. Do you think there's a correlation between all this money being spent and complete dysfunction in government?
Well, here's the perfect example of how this type of corruption influences Congress. On the 2010 midterm elections, and that was the first election after Citizens United, as you mentioned, the type of corporations that took advantage of the new campaign finance landscape were mostly oil and gas corporations. Big publicly traded oil companies like ExxonMobil and Chevron funneled their donations into the midterms using fronts like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and companies like Koch Industries and many of their allies in the gas and fracking industry used fronts like the Americans for Prosperity Group. They were the biggest spenders by far, even eclipsing the party committees in 2010. So it should be no surprise that in 2011, this new oil Congress, you could call it, in the last 2 years, were rated by the New York Times as the most polluter-friendly Congress in all of American history. They did everything from trying to repeal the Clean Air Act to amend and basically gut the Clean Water Act, obviously taking huge steps to deny climate change. One of the very first steps that last Congress took was to dissolve the House of Representatives Global Warming Committee. So this money clearly buys policy, and that's the big kind of warning for the next Congress, the next presidency. All this money has been spent, many of it from undisclosed sources, but believe you me, the lobbyists know where the money's coming from, and the lawmakers know the source of the money, so they'll be looking to deliver on the favors that were granted through this campaign.
And David, I'm going to ask you this question. I do want to talk also about the fact that it's not just Citizens United, it's not just the amount of money that's coming into the workplace, or I mean that's coming into these elections, but it's also the workplace. Right now, employers can go ahead and tell their employees not only who to vote for, but they can encourage them to spend money in these races, to donate their time to these elections. So can you talk a little bit about how these political stammering is kind of coming into the workplace and the effect that that's having on Americans and in turn this election?
Well, Megan, you're exactly right, and I appreciate how you framed it, because we know that the corporate spending in elections is atrocious. but it goes even deeper because corporations claiming constitutional rights, the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the 14th Amendment, have overturned democratically enacted public health and public safety laws, worker protection laws. As Lee pointed out, they're using their so-called First Amendment rights beyond merely just making political contributions, but to communicate and intimidate their workers. I mean, this is outrageous. I do want to really, though, lift up something that has been mostly unreported in the corporate media, and that is the fact that there is a grassroots movement taking place across this country to rise up. Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, Greens, some Republicans, we're coming together under the Move to Amend coalition. And did you know that 7 million voters at the local or state level are going to have an opportunity to vote their support for a constitutional amendment to abolish all corporate constitutional rights for both for-profit and nonprofits, to abolish in its entirety the idea that money equals speech? Think about it. 7 million voters are weighing in on that possibility. From Colorado to Montana to over half of the citizens of Massachusetts are going to vote on it. An entire county in California. And we just got started. I'm telling you, the American people are not taking this lying down. We are building a genuine social movement, and I don't care whether somebody is what party they're in. I don't care what ideology they have. If folks agree with us at Move to Amend that we need a functioning democratic republic where only human beings have inherent and inalienable constitutional rights and that we, the people, are sovereign, then I encourage folks to get involved with us, because no matter who wins the presidency at Move to Amend, our work will continue unabated. We are going to amend the United States Constitution to make it clear only human beings have inherent and inalienable constitutional rights. Money is not speech, and therefore not only federal Congress, but also state legislators and local
and David
officials.
David, we're going to have to end it there. Lee Fong, David Cobb, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate both of your opinions. But we're going to have to move along now. Love them or hate them, vice presidential candidates play a huge role in campaigns. Sometimes helpful, sometimes not so much. Here now is election moment number 5.
Romney wants to he said in the first 100 days, he's going to let the big banks once again write their own rules. Unchain Wall Street. They're going to put you all back in chains.
And we're going to take a quick break, but still ahead, we've heard the mainstream news stations talk nonstop about voter fraud and voter suppression during this election season. How will this affect the outcome of the election? We'll debate in just a minute.